There goes Johnny in the Prius. We're here at the Nevada station, the Auburn Amtrak terminal, and eventually my train's gonna show up. We're going to, oh, there's my train way down there. We're going to look at a Starduster. Well, hopefully buy a Starduster. Rolling. Across the bay. There goes the Coliseum out there. So we're on our way to look at a Starduster. And Starduster is going to be a little bit bigger of a biplane than that Acrosport that I looked at a few weeks ago.
Ladies and gentlemen, arriving Oakland Coliseum Transport Department.
I wasn't really planning on, going to look at another plane so quick, but this one popped up and it was in my price range, so it's not very often when these planes pop up kind of in the low 20s. And it looks like it's pretty nice. I talked to the owner and it was recovered 9 years ago, so it should have a pretty fresh covering job. And it's only got an 0320, so it'll be a little underpowered compared to some of the higher performance bikes, but it should be a good time. I can go out and do loops and rolls in it, and I think I can fit it in the hangar. Oh, there she is.
Oh yeah, you're welcome to come.
I finished my inspection, and I can't see anything major wrong with it. There's a few of the fasteners are a little rusty, but it looks like it's in pretty good shape. So I'm gonna make the guy an offer, and then if he takes my offer, then we'll go flying. It's a little blustery down here at Hollister. I tried to do my first landing on 3-1 and had a little crosswind, and it wasn't too pretty, but we didn't ground loop it. Then I did about 3 more landings on the 2-4, and it felt a lot better. So we're about to gas her up and head for home. Nice thing about these 2-seater biplanes is you really get a lot of storage. You can fit about 2 sandwiches back there, I think, and maybe a Leatherman. But this thing's a machine for good times. It's not really a machine for hauling lots of stuff. Alright, well, we're about to blast off for home. Wait for this wind to come in. You can kind of see what's going on out there. Well, if you look around the wires and the bling, it is blustering. The old Starduster's running like a dream. Stopped in Jackson real quick to get some gas. I don't the gas gauge doesn't have a gas gauge. It has a fuel totalizer, or so I have an idea of how much I have, but I don't want to cut it close. Starduster is saving the hangar. She's quite the craft. It was a bit of an adventure getting her home, though. I had well, let me tell you about it. So I flew it with the previous owner for about an hour and a half, and we did, I think, 4 or 5 landings, and I was feeling pretty comfortable, flying her. She's definitely squirrely and more of a handful than the Chief, but my last couple landings with him were I felt like I could get the plane home. So I dropped him off at Hollister and gassed her up, and then we headed for home. And it doesn't have a gas gauge. It has a fuel flow meter, so that kind of tracks your fuel flow, so you kind of have an idea of how much fuel you should have. But I don't think it's calibrated very well, because it was showing me burning a lot of fuel, and I was getting low. I didn't want to run out of gas and end up on my neighbor's channel, so I said, I'll pull into Jackson and get some fuel. And I landed in Jackson, and Jackson's a little bit narrower runway, 60 feet, but I felt confident that I'd be able to keep her on the runway. And I got down, and I maybe touched down a little bit hard, possibly had my toes a little bit on the brakes. I'm not really sure. But first of all, I got a pretty bad tailwheel shimmy, which I hadn't really had before. And that kind of sent me swerving down the runway a little bit. And then, I try to slow it down so I start getting on the brakes, and we were off to the rodeo. It started pulling off to the left a little bit, and so I corrected with some right rudder, probably a little bit too much right rudder. So we started going right, and then we were going left again, and I got it mostly slowed down, but we ended up having a low-speed ground loop, and I ended up, pointing back the other direction, looking where I came from. So a ground loop basically happens with your tail dragger when you're coming down the runway, and if you start getting sideways and you get past a certain point where your tail, your rudder, and your tail wheel and your differential braking just isn't strong enough, and the airplane has enough momentum to just kind of swing all the way around, and then you're pointing back the way you came from. And if you're going fast enough, you'll drag a wingtip, and it can do some real damage and total your airplane. But in my situation, I wasn't going very fast, so it just kind of spun around on me, and no damage was done. I taxied off, got gas, and checked out the tail wheel, and it was a little loose, but I was like, well, I probably just wasn't quite on my game, and so I blasted off and flew her home. But then, landing here, once again, I got a little bit of shimmy in the tail wheel, and I was trying to really be easy on the pedals, because I didn't want to get kind of into one of those situations where you're fighting it, going back and forth. And but I kept drifting off to the left, off center line, and I finally got it stopped without going off the runway, but it was a lot scarier than I wanted it to be. And I got the plane back in the hangar, and everybody came over. We had a good time. Everybody loved the biplane. Everybody was all happy with the smoke. But in the pit of my stomach, I had this feeling that maybe I had bit off a little more than I could chew with this thing. I'm not the greatest pilot by any means, but I've had quite a few hours in the Chief and flown quite a few different airplanes. And but even outside of all that, when I was flying the plane with the previous owner, I felt pretty good. The plane was doing what I wanted it to do. My landings weren't perfect by any means, but I felt like I could safely get it on the ground. And so going into Jackson and then coming into here, and having so much trouble really kind of shook me a little bit. So we put the plane away, went home, and came back the next day, and I was like, I need to get the tail up in the air and find out how loose that tail wheel was, because I had shimmy on those last 2 landings, which I hadn't had before, so I didn't want to have that again. And the tail wheel was pretty loose. I had a friend of mine came up, and we tightened everything down and really got everything aligned. It was kind of cocked off to the left a little bit, so we got the tail wheel lined up right, got everything tightened down, and I felt better about that. But then the main kicker was that I got in, and I felt like the brakes were a little weird, and I probably should have noticed this when I first had my screwy landing in Jackson, but being it's a new plane, I wasn't, you're not quite as in tune to how the plane should feel when, it's your first day of flying it. And but I got in there and felt the brakes, and the right brake was really mushy. And so basically what was happening when I'd go to put on the brakes, the left brake would grab more than the right and send me off to the left. And it's not a good thing. It's not something you want to happen on a tail dragger. On a tail dragger, you have toe brakes, which, or heel brakes, but you have differential braking so that you can push the left brake or the right brake more than the other to kind of help steer the plane. And when one brake works better than the other, then it makes it really tough to land. I think now that I've kind of had that experience, if I ended up in the same situation, I'd kind of be a little wiser to keep my feet off the brakes and just let it roll out, if I have enough runway. But anyways, we bled the brakes, got them both feeling real nice, and then I decided I got to get back on the horse. And so the day after I brought it home, we took it out again. So let's go. Look at her sitting there. She's such a proud flying machine. All right, let me see if I can get in here and we'll go flying. We're back. So I got 4 landings in yesterday, kind of before the storm rolled in, and it was a night and day difference. My landings weren't perfect. I was still kind of floating around a little bit, and they weren't the smoothest. But at least finally the airplane was behaving the way that I feel like it should behave. It's definitely a lot squirrelier than the Chief, and I wouldn't recommend flying one of these without at least getting a few checkouts in with somebody that knows what they're doing. But after my landings yesterday, I feel like I'll probably be able to spend, a couple weeks or months in the pattern, getting familiar with it, and hopefully I won't bend any metal or break anything. So, anyways, that's the Starduster for you. It's so much fun to fly. It's this airplane is by far one of the least practical airplanes that you can buy. And this is definitely kind of a midlife crisis thing for me. I've always wanted to buy a plane. You grow up as a kid watching people do loops and rolls, and you dream of that stuff. And so, as far as Lucy goes, a friend of the Super Chief and put her up in his hangar for the time being. Eventually, I'll get both Lucy and the Starduster in my hangar. I took a lot of measurements. There's another Starduster on the field here that's kind of been a ramp queen out there, and I took some pretty extensive measurements of that plane. and figured out a way to get them both in here. So it'll be tight, but at least I'll be able to keep them both in the same hangar. And Lucy will be, we'll be flying them both. So before we end this one though, you know, anytime you get a plane that's kind of sporty like this, it would be irresponsible of me not to kind of look at the accidents and see how people that have come before me have crashed their Stardusters. So let's go inside. Time where we can go on here with a few clicks. We can see all the accidents of just about every Starduster that was ever made. If we go to the old Aviation Safety Network here, let's scroll down and we can find the Starduster. Where'd it go here? Stolp. Oh, there's the old Stitz Playboy. That's what my dad flew. So we got the old Starduster Too. If you pull this up, we'll show you all the accidents going back to 1966. You know, there's some fatalities, and I haven't looked at every one of these yet, but I plan to. And there's been, you know, even some more recent ones. There's 2 pages of them. And, you know, a lot of these are probably just ground loops, but there's some fatalities that, you know, people screwing around mostly. Let's look at this one here. Witnesses reported the pilot was doing aerobatics near the airport. They observed 2 snap rolls and then saw the aircraft enter a spin, maneuvering at an estimated 1,500 feet. So, you know, if you're going to be up there screwing around in your Starduster, you want to have some altitude. The lower you get, the less time you have to correct a mistake. This one, witnesses reported seeing the aircraft perform a series of loop maneuvers at the top of the last loop. The aircraft rolled upright, then rolled into a near vertical spin, which continued until impact. The pilot had no history of spin recovery practice in this aircraft. And, you know, seeing these kind of stall spin accidents in this plane doesn't surprise me that much after flying it, because the elevator is really powerful. Like, you could easily get yourself into a situation where you're, you know, looking at the ground and you pull back and you're spinning. While flying over a lake at low altitude, the left wing of the aircraft struck wires on a moored sailboat about 50 feet above the water level. So you got to be careful flat hatting in these things. The accident airport struck terrain while in an out-of-control descent shortly after takeoff on a personal flight. Witnesses reported a normal takeoff, initial climb, and then the airplane rotated to a near vertical climb, followed by a hammerhead maneuver to the left, and then into the ground. You know, one thing I noticed just flying this thing is that, you know, you feel like you're flying a fighter jet. I mean, I've never flown a fighter jet, but it's just really sporty, and it doesn't have a lot of power, so you could easily find yourself pointing straight up too close to the ground, screwing around, and it wouldn't end well. This one back in 1980, low pass before a crowd, before departure, rolled inverted, crashed. Exhibition smoke was on. So, you know, it's sobering to read these accidents, but, you know, it would just be irresponsible of me not to pay attention to the machine I'm flying, because, you know, I don't want it to punch my ticket. All right, that's all for this one. Thanks for coming along for the ride. If you enjoy the adventure, subscribe. I don't know where it'll be. I'm gonna put it way over here.